hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nonprofit Enthusiast Live. I'm your host, Lasheena Williams, and I'm so excited to be back as we continue the conversation on fundraising and friendraising for nonprofit organizations. So I am so excited to have Dr. Emilie Socash back with us today. So I'm going to bring her on up and we can start the conversation. Hello, hello.
Hello, hello, Lasheena. How are you?
Good. Thank you for coming back on.
My pleasure.
Before we hop into today's topic, do you mind just talking a little bit about yourself, how you entered the nonprofit industry, for those who may not have got to know you yet?
Sure, happy to do so. So, as you said, my name is Dr. Emilie Socash. That little doctor piece of things indicates that I have my doctoral degree in organizational leadership psychology. And I did that after completing about 20 years or so working in the nonprofit sector, first half of which was very much on the development side, very apropos for today's conversation. And then the latter half in executive leadership. And I really wanted to get an academic foundation for how our people make our missions possible. And that's why I pursued and completed my doctoral degree. In 2018, I started up the Nonprofit Help Center, and we are all about training the people who power our missions. And so we have a couple snazzy training platforms. We also do organizational assessments, and we do custom training solutions for nonprofits nationwide. And I always love spending time with you, Lasheena. I'm eager to get started.
Oh yeah, it's always a good time and always a good conversation. So I'm excited. So let's dive in. So this month's topic is fundraising and friendraising. And when we talk about friendraising, we're talking about not just going to events and networking, but really being intentional along with building those long-lasting relationships with who can eventually become donors for the organization. So let's talk about some tips that you might have for nonprofits in those areas.
Yeah, so I have two tips that come to mind. And one of which is probably a repeat of something that we've all heard time and time again. The first one is going from that place of transaction to really a transformation with our donors, right? So it's not just, hey, give us your annual gift, please, or it's that time of year again, but rather talking and emphasizing the transformation that our donors are making relative to our mission and to our community. But here's where I would digress into my second tip. It kind of bridges from that transformation sort of a vibe to think about how are we as fundraisers and as nonprofit professionals inspiring a transformation in our donor and in their identity. Okay. So tip number 2 is to really start thinking about our donor identity and our own identity, and where there's a little bit of a Venn diagram where the two cross over, because that's really where a lot of magic happens. And so we connect with people with a bunch of different lenses. And all those lenses are informed by little components of our identity. You know, we might be a parent, a neighbor, a community member, a nonprofit professional. We might be somebody who grew up in a certain part of the country, or we might be new to town. All these identities come to bear when we're having conversations with other people, including our donors. And before I go deep on how these identities come to pass and how we can leverage them, Lasheena, I would turn it back to you to hear kind of what direction that takes you in your thinking.
Yeah, I love that because when you talked about the Venn diagram, I saw it. When you talk about the Venn diagram and your personal identity and your donor identity, and that's such a good way to put it, is finding what is that connection point. Because I was actually just speaking with the organization today, and they're kind of like, they kind of shared how if I was to translate it to what you just said, they shared how they met with the donor and shared their organization's identity, you can say, with the donor, but the donor did not really catch it. And I
Mhm.
think what was missing in using the terms that you kind of just presented, what was missing, and this is something we talked through, was not making that connection, that middle piece of the Venn diagram that you're talking about, for that donor. So it's more like the donors presenting their identity, the organization presenting theirs, but the organization not necessarily making that middle
Yep.
connection that you talked about. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And
Mhm,
so often we see this, and I
mhm,
think it's just a normal human tendency. Our organization's mission is kind of like a round peg. And sometimes our donors' motivation to be philanthropic and to support their community is like a square hole. And so we
mhm,
think, oh, there's no match. If there's somebody that always supports and like their entire giving history is all focused on youth,
mhm,
how can I possibly make a connection for them to support my older adult or
mhm,
my domestic violence or my non-youth focused
mhm,
organization? But rather, there's a little connector piece in the middle that
mhm.
we can really activate to line up what seems at first like a round peg and a square hole.
And it's those round pegs and square hole situations that are the best donors, because a lot of times other organizations, let's say other youth organizations, may be thinking that same way and not necessarily build the connection with that potential donor. So that provides opportunity there as
Totally.
well. Hmm.
Totally. And something you just said sparked another layer that I wanted to share with you and your audience,
Hmm.
which is how we think about these conversations. Now,
Hmm.
a lot of us, I won't assume that everybody, but a lot of us have heard of the concept of a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset.
Hmm.
So we always want to approach these conversations with a growth mindset, right? There's lots of opportunity, there's lots of abundance, there's lots of potential and possibility. Now, the psychologist behind this growth versus fixed mindset idea, her name is Carol Dweck, and definitely suggest reading. She has a number of titles that are very, very accessible, really
Hmm.
enjoyable reads. If you want to go deeper on that, check out Carol Dweck's work. But
Hmm.
after she came out with these conceptual ideas of growth and fixed mindsets, she also did some research surrounding identity. And she went deep. And I'm not going to go that deep because this is her research. I can't speak to her research. Really, really good stuff. And it really parallels this conversation that we're having about round peg, square hole. So,
Hmm.
in her further research, she talks about how our identities are often formed and cemented by all of these emotional memories that we have in the way that we did something. So, we all know about
Hmm.
the warm glow effect, right? When
Hmm.
we give a gift, we get this warm glow. That is exactly the type of little neural pathways nugget that she did all this research on. But here's where it becomes useful for us. So she said that anytime that we have the opportunity to interact with somebody and observe or shape how they go through this process of making this emotional memory, we have the ability to really have an impact on their identity. And this pathway has three parts. So the first one is the behavior. Now, the behavior is giving the gift or asking for the gift. Like our behavior might be asking for the gift, their behavior might be giving the gift, or politely putting us down the road.
Hmm.
The second aspect is the emotion that came along with the behavior. So I gave the gift. Now, how did I feel about that? And then the third component is called an action tendency. And so this is kind of like the interest of the person to repeat that little chain. Like, am I
Hmm.
motivated to do that again? Am I motivated to keep going down this path? And so there's a little bit of an acronym, BEATS. So behaviors,
Hmm.
emotions, and action tendencies. And all
Okay.
of these, being aware of all of these components helps us really better understand our donor's identity and ours as well. So if we're
Hmm.
able to help them
Mm-hmm.
form of behavior that they ultimately have a positive emotion about, that they want to repeat and take action on again, we are really transforming our donor from, oh, yeah, I gave a gift to this youth focused organization, to I am a donor of this organization, to I
Mm-hmm.
am part of making this mission a reality.
Love it. Wow. I love it. And I'm like fun. Okay, so when you went into psychology and
Mhm,
you shared that you did 20 years of fundraising, did
mhm.
you have that that psychology background then as well?
I didn't, but I was fascinated, so fascinated. I would say I was like an armchair psychologist. I ultimately was called to actually studying psychology because so much of our work in fundraising, friendraising, community building, and community leadership really is all about understanding the psychology of our population, of our community members, of our stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes, I found myself when I was early in my career having kind of an intuition or a gut instinct on, this is a way to approach a certain donor, or this is a way that they would not prefer to be approached. But I couldn't quite put my finger on why. And
Mm-hmm.
I kept going back to, additional readings on, how do relationships work? How does the giver and asker, kind of the psychology of
Mm-hmm.
fundraising, how does that work? And
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, I realized, hey, I want to go much farther with this because it's a personal passion point for me.
Yeah. Wow, that's awesome. Because I mean, having that psychology behind that
Mhm.
just helps with kind of building that relationship, especially, with the future donor that, yeah, I love it. Thank
Definitely. And
you.
Lashina, I want to just layer on a reality check
Yeah.
for those who are sharing time with us today.
Mm-hmm.
So you definitely don't have to go for your undergraduate, your master's, or your doctorate in psychology to do any of what we're talking about. The
Mm-hmm.
thing that you can do today is to really reflect on your own identity and how
Mm-hmm.
your identity shows up in your fundraising work. And so that might look like getting good with your relationship with money,
Mm-hmm.
understanding how your gut feels when you are interacting with those who are of means, that there is wealth in our community,
Mm-hmm.
how you interact with people who you have very little in common with. Those are common sticking points that
Mm-hmm.
um, that can give us a little bit of a speed bump in our conversations, but really turning that mirror on ourselves, getting good with our own identities in the fundraising space is the most powerful thing that you can do.
Wow, I love that. And I just think about myself and just my own personal journey when it comes to the just the fundraising space as a
Mhm.
whole, starting out with my organization back in 2012. The way I asked then and the way I ask now is totally different. And it was a lot of that was kind of connecting to myself and also realizing that it wasn't about me at no point in the acts. It was
Mhm.
about those that we're serving and that we're impacting in the community. And
Yes.
that transformed, like the moment that happened, it transformed the way I connected with donors, number one, and then the growth of our organization. So sometimes we get in our own way, and you talking about knowing your own identity is extremely helpful in the process for increasing, the dollars that come into your organization. So I love, oh my gosh, I love it.
Right. There's always just so much benefit to better understanding ourselves because even though right now in this conversation we're talking about developing effective techniques and approaches to our fundraising, but anytime that we get a better sense of self, this affects our career path, this affects our personal relationships, and it affects our overall mental well-being. So it's a little bit of a twofer, maybe even a threefer
Mhm.
when we better understand ourselves.
Oh, that's so good. Because rarely do you hear, especially when it's the conversation of making the acts, you rarely hear looking at yourself. It's a lot of time, here's this framework, or here's this, here's the order to how you do that, and this what's happening. Well, here's a formula for it. But yeah, starting with the reflection of yourself, oh my gosh, that is absolutely amazing.
Yes,
And if a lot of boards even just thought like that as well, because sometimes there's board members that don't feel
sure.
comfortable axing and so forth.
Yeah,
That would help a lot. So thank you for bringing
totally.
that psychology
Of
behind that
course.
fundraising and fundraising.
Of course. Yeah, it's just so stinking critical. And I think that, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but I can speak from my personal experience and what I think I'm hearing from you, Lasheena, and what we've talked about in other conversations.
Hmm.
Earlier in our careers, we might have an emphasis on developing competence around what an ask looks like, developing competence around what our mission is all about, some of the facts and figures, what your gift is going to make possible. And those are all very important things.
Hmm.
Maybe even a little bit about compliance issues and laws around fundraising, all of that stuff. But over time, we have to also develop confidence in ourselves, in the way that we approach donors, in knowing that like you said, that we're asking on behalf of the organization and on behalf of the population that we serve.
Hmm.
And that competence to confidence shift, it requires a lot of time spent in the saddle with yourself and getting
Mm.
good with, hey, here's 9 things I am really great at doing, asking about, types of asks to structure. Maybe here's 3 that they're just not in my skill set right now, but I can be
Hmm.
really confident because I know where my boundaries are and I know where I want to improve.
Hmm. Oh my gosh, love it. Thank you so much for that. That just gave me a new lens on, fundraising and fundraising as well. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Any other tips that you have regarding fundraising or fundraising that you wanted to cover?
One other thing that I'm curious, I have a little bit of a curiosity around this. And so I'm hoping that you'll share with me what you and maybe what you've heard from some of your listeners about. So we talk about fundraising and we sometimes talk about friendraising, but
Hmm.
our donors are not our friends.
Hmm.
And so I'm curious where you feel that dividing line happens, right? I
Hmm.
know that I've definitely found that it's kind of a little bit of a moving target,
Hmm.
that we want to have friendly relationships, positive, productive, effective conversations with our donors, but typically our friend raising really is like that big part of the funnel where we're really getting everybody in to become a donor. So I'm
Hmm.
curious, what do you hear from your audience about what that dividing line is between fundraising and friend raising?
So that dividing line between, I guess, there's definitely a connection, I believe, between fundraising and fundraising. And
Mm-hmm.
fundraising in the sense of, when we talk about it, we often are talking about it in the sense of when you're going to different events or different, um, you know, networking events or whichever, to build relationships, not just going there and passing cards and
Mm-hmm.
and then you're out, and then you know how that is, you have the big stack of cards and that's it. It's
Yep.
going there with intention, knowing that when you go, who's going to be who's going to be in attendance, who
Mm-hmm.
there do I need to get to know a little bit more and build that
Mm-hmm.
relationship with, who do I need to kind of talk more with outside of that venue. So it might be like, hey, Dr. Socash, I've been following you. I see all the amazing work that you're doing. So glad to see you tonight. Could we meet up? Do you have some time in the calendar just for us to kind of get together
Mm-hmm.
maybe in the coming weeks? So it's extending that relationship
Mm-hmm.
beyond that, because sometimes there's that mindset of, hey, I know this person who's a potential funder is going to be at this event. I I'm going to grab their card. You grab their card and that's it.
And that's
Or,
it.
there's no follow up. There's no, starting that relationship with them. So that's kind of like that, how they connect with one another is being very intentional about those relationships that you build. And we know with friends, and when we say friends, we're not talking about friends where it's like your homie, you just relax. I mean, it might be like that for some, but you have those friends that there's still that nice professional line, but you could pick up the phone, and if something's happening in your organization, they are going to be there to support and help you. So that's the type of friendships that we're really talking about, is building that connection, that you have champions and advocates that are there to support you in your mission. Yeah.
I love how you deduced that. And there's a word in there that you didn't use, but that I heard you describe, which was clear boundaries or structure. Maybe structure is the right word, because when we make that transition from somebody we're connected with on social media, and then we're an acquaintance, then after that, giving it that structure of, we're going to develop a relationship by spending some time together, talking about this program, this initiative, this particular way that our round peg in your square hole can really explore what we can do together. And it's that structure, I think, that we want to be cognizant of. And that really, going back to that identity piece, when we're strong on our identity, that we're here representing our organization, and that even though our Venn diagrams may have good overlap, that our fundraising really has that structure. That's what I'm hearing from you, and that's what I'm really like stitching together. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how that fundraising and that fundraising has that connection to one another. Yeah.
Yep. Makes so much sense. And the work that we do, it's so people focused in every direction.
Yep.
And which is probably why I was like so fascinated to study more deeply the psychological aspect of it, because these interactions, the interrelationships, they're all just so unique and so fascinating to hear, why somebody chose to do something, why they may not have chosen to do something. And yeah, the fundraising aspect of it, it's so amazing.
Love it. Sorry, our phone started just ringing in the middle of the.
I thought I heard a little something.
That's why I muted while you were talking, because I didn't want it to interrupt our conversation. Yeah. So no, I love that. I love the Venn diagram. I love that you asked that question of breaking down that fundraising, friend-raising, and what does that relationship look like? Because that can easily get misinterpreted. So I definitely love that we dived into that. And then something that I want to ask you about. So we have your personal. Now I'm visualizing this vendor. We have your personal, the donor, the intersection. Where does the organization fall within that?
So it could be its own. It could be very much its own, or its own circle, or the organization can also be a subset, a little nested circle within our own domain. So each of us is a full person. We're a professional, but we're also a full person that has interests and has hobbies and peculiarities and all of our normal human trappings that exist outside of our work life. And so I would argue that our organization is a small subset of who we are as people. And that's kind of an inner circle that we want to have that overlap with our donor. All of us have sat down across the table from a donor at a cup of coffee, and we have those initial warm-up pieces of conversation, all the small talk about, you learn that the two of you may have gone to the same college, or you grew up near each other but never knew each other. You have kids, you have vacations coming up, you talk about the weather, right? All of these life experiences exist in both of your larger circles, but then you as the fundraiser, you're going to hone it in to really say, okay, so now I'm going to focus on this organization, why it matters to me, why I'm here sitting in front of you, and why it should matter to you.
I love that. Thank you for that. And I love it being a subset within your own, because that's that connection between you and your organization versus it kind of being out in its own area.
Definitely.
Love that, love that. Well, thank you so much for joining us once again. Can you share the best way for others to stay in contact with you?
Yeah, definitely. So you can always find me on LinkedIn, and you can look up either my company page, Nonprofit Help Center. That's probably the easiest way. Or you can find me, Dr. Emilie Socash, Emilie, and Socash like so much cash, which is totally appropriate for a fundraising
Yes,
conversation.
it is. I love it. And now I'm not gonna unforget that. Like,
Right?
like
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's memorable.
it is. I'm definitely gonna remember that now. Thank you. Okay, so thank you. So you all know how to stay connected. Thank you so much for coming on. We'll love to have you come back on again in the future.
Definitely.
And thank you all so much. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.